Haolonggu consistently gives us pleasant surprises. You never know what you're going to get, kinda like life. And this time around, they're going back to the stegosaurs. Specifically, it's the namesake of the dacentrurines, Dacentrurus itself. Dacentrurus means tail full of points and comes from the Greek da, which apparently means very or full of, kentron, meaning point, which you might also recognize in the name Kentrosaurus, and ura, meaning tail. I wasn't able to confirm the root da, so if any of you Greek speakers could enlighten me, I'd be grateful. I think you'll agree the name is appropriate when you look at this. Dacentrurus has been estimated to be between 8 to 9 meters or 26 to 30 feet long. This model is about 23 centimeters or 9 inches, making the scale about 1 to 35 for the lower 8 meter estimate. And for a size reference, here's the one of the artistic models 1 to 35 humanoid. Now once again, Haolonggu offers two color variants. We have the green and the orange. Now if I never see another brown-based dinosaur model again, it will be too soon. But I'm also starting to feel that some of the Haolonggu's color schemes are beginning to look a bit derivative. The orange one calls to mind the Haolonggu Apatosaurus, Pachyrhinosaurus, and a tiny bit of the orange Uranosaurus. The green reminds me a little of the green Uranosaurus, but since I like variations of the traditional red on green body in stegosaurs, that's the one I got. Now let's get to the detail. So first, a look at the head. Now straight away I'm seeing some improvements, but partly because this is a larger sized model offering a bigger canvas. The detail is a little sharper in general. You can see that while the facial area is fine, the scale size increases around the jawline and also the throat, suggesting the gular armor we've seen in association with Stegosaurus, so that's a very nice nod. You can see here the detail on the top of the head. The eyes aren't just dots as they were before, but full eyes with pupils, so that's a very nice change. The mouth line is now quite visible compared to previous offerings, even without the differentiating color, and mainly because of the sculpt. And now the body. First, that long neck, with those paired plates that are very distinct from the broader ones in Stegosaurus. You can see a very nice blend in the color. The white stripes are very naturally worked together with the green. There are no stark squiggles like we saw in the Urhosaurus. You can see the detail in the skin texture too. In fact, the sculpted detail is as for Haolonggu's usual high standard. You'll notice between the basement texture, we have scatterings of larger feature scutes in a random pattern which I always like to see. The sculpted detail is just wonderful. Yet more detail. Now the forelimb. You can see the texture of the scales. There's that parascapular shoulder spike, which at this stage is speculative, inspired by similar spines found in Kentrosaurus. Now these are sharp, though not quite as sharp as the Palaeoecology, so be careful. The color fade is really nice, and together with the texturing here, has a rather natural look to it. Interestingly, notice the different skin texture around the base of the horn here. And going down, we get into the arm. Then the forearm. Now here's something interesting. while we've seen scutes on the anterior of the arm in other models before, here we have them on the posterior aspect. And you can clearly see a differentiation from the surrounding type here. If we follow Stegosaurus, only digits 1 and 2 are hooved, with digits 3 and 4 unshod. This obviously isn't the case here. But I still like the posture and the splay of the hands as it spreads to receive the weight of the animal. The spikes on the body are soft and pliable, but whoa, full of points is correct. These are almost all tipped with very sharp points, especially this one, so take care with children. I've spiked myself a few times on these. The bases from which they erupt also have that extra detailing in the integument, as does the dorsal ridge between the two rows, and that's a pleasing aesthetic to have. These continue later down the animal to terminate in a most interesting way, as we'll see in the tail later. And then the hind limb. One thing you'll notice is how much nicer the improved creasing between the body and limb are. Now, these are no longer the very thick rolls we've seen in earlier works, and thus looking very natural. Again, going down the thigh, the leg, and the feet. Now the tail, look at that texture, and also the spikes. I love this blend of color down here. And at the tip of the dorsal tail, these rougher scales cluster to form what might be another form of armor. Indeed, to a lesser extent, you see these textures here, which is a very interesting speculative reconstruction. So credit to Haolonggu here. Now, a few Chinese collectors have remarked of the presence of air bubbles, probably from the molding process. In my case, I don't see any obvious ones, but I'm sure hundreds of pairs of your sharp eyes will set me straight as I give you a quick once-over. Now, just a very quick fact on the dacentrurines. There's a tidbit I always found very interesting. The dacentrurines consist of Dacentrurus and Miragaya. Some still believe that Alcalá to be its own distinct genus, in which case that's a third member. Now, Dacentrurus was found first. As you can see, it consisted mainly of posterior elements. This is NH MUK OR46013, the holotype, Then Miragaia was found. Now this is the holotype ML433 with mainly anterior elements. Costos et al. Had a most interesting proposal, with Miragaia and Dacentrurus both found in layers of the same age, Dacentrurus found with mainly posterior elements,
on one hand,
and Miragaia with mainly anterior elements, and none of its diagnostic characters present in Dacentrurus
in the other. I ask you, Captain, what conclusion would you draw?
That in fact both of these were the same animal, and since Dacentrurus was named first, Miragaia was the junior synonym.
Precisely.
And when that proposal was brought up, I remember thinking, whoa, what a cool story about how things fit together like that. Unfortunately, throwing cold water on the whole thing was the identification of another Miragaia specimen, MG4863, with tail elements and a relatively complete specimen. In fact, it's one of the most complete stegosaur fossils we have. 29 characteristics were found to determine that Miragaia was in fact its own genus, with two results. First, we now have two genera that are sufficiently close to each other and also enough to confirm an earlier proposed clade, the Dacentrurine. And second, and more relevant to us, is that there's still a lot we don't know about how a complete Dacentrurus will look like, since we can't happily fill in with Miragaia. So there'll always be speculative leeway, for example, that parascapular spine. Of course, this is just the crudest summary, and I highly recommend you read the papers I'll reference below. Incidentally, the Miragaia project, which I highly recommend you follow on Facebook, has a more recent update to the Miragaia reconstruction. And finally, comparisons. Now the most obvious comparison will be the other Dacentrurine, the Pianeso Miragaia. This one seems to be based on the beautiful Ashley Patch reconstruction here, and having them side by side, you see the similarities in the long necks and the narrow plates. They really look good together. And both certainly qualify as being full of points, not just in the tail, but everywhere else. Then, Haolonggu's own Wuerhosaurus. You'll see there's a big size difference. You'll also see in terms of paint application that this is much improved. There are no stark lines or marks that take away the illusion of reality here. Looking now at Pianeso's Tuotiansaurus with similar plate morphology, including that parascapular spine. You can see the size difference quite clearly here too. Now keep in mind though that this is about 1/30 scale. The Pianeso does have very rough scales, but bear in mind that this was more than 2 years ago. The Pianeso has since evolved, but I think it's safe to say that Haolonggu at this point has surpassed the standard of Pianeso at that time, and I see them only continuing to improve. So it will be a very interesting race between the two. Unfortunately, I don't have Pianeso's Stegosaurus with me. That's out for repainting and won't be back anytime soon. And some other Stegosauruses you might like to see are the Rebor Stegosaurus, and the Wild Safari Sophie. And finally, for a size reference, here's the Wilson T-Rex. And for those of you who have him, the Cameron. So that's it for the Dacentrurus, yet another welcome addition from Haolonggu. I think you can see that some of the poverty of detail with earlier releases have to do with the size that the sculptors and manufacturers had to work with, as this larger model has many improvements over their previous Urhersaurus. Independent of size, however, Haolonggu just continues to improve, as you saw in the finer skin creases. There have been accuracy issues, but out of that tripod I always mentioned of sculpt detail, paint application, and accuracy, I think it's the lowest hanging fruit to pick and the easiest one to fix. Haolonggu has also added a fourth leg, price, and here the value you get for what you pay is way ahead of many other offerings. So I'm very eager to see what they have to offer, though selfishly, if the pace could slow down eventually, that would be easier on the wallet and the conscience. And let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.